Today is a day when we celebrate motherhood, but also family. In Vermont, the state has been working to make it easier for families to move and grow in the state. We spoke with Senator Kesha Hinsdale, who has been working on policies at the State House to improve affordability, paid leave, and childcare. And she also knows a thing or two about entertaining a toddler while getting that work done. Thanks so much for joining us for NBC5 In Depth today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And my daughter Mira is actually no stranger to this show. She has been on before when we've been celebrating Mother's Day, and she asked to come back again.
Well, we're so excited to have her here, especially sitting next to her mom. Obviously, we wanted to talk a little bit today in celebration of the holiday that is Mother's Day and talking about how the state itself has worked to become a family-friendly place. Now, you're a California native. You came here to be at UVM, and you stuck around. So talk to me a little bit about just, what it's been like crafting your own family while chasing those career aspirations.
Exactly. I try to serve as a visible model, both for the triumphs, but also the tribulations of trying to be a young person engineering a good quality of life in Vermont. As you said, so it feels like a long time ago now. I graduated UVM in 2008 and ran for the legislature that same year. And I like to tell people, it was the start of the Great Recession. I was a renter. I didn't own my own car. And I went to knock on all of my neighbors' doors and ask them to be their representative in the House. And I remember, somebody said, so let me get this straight. You grew up in Hollywood. You don't mind the winters. You want to be our legislator. You sound crazy enough to be a Vermonter. You have my vote. And kind of the rest is history. I spent 8 years in the House. I left. I went to grad school. I met my now husband and ran for the Senate in 2020. So over the course of the 5 years that I served in the Senate leading up to this year, my husband and I got married. We bought a house, and we were in the middle of the pandemic. So over the course of the pandemic, the house we bought doubled in value. I think, like a lot of Vermonters, we were lucky if we had purchased a house, but runaway costs have really impacted a lot of families, and we know that personally. And then we became happily the statistic of 2 adults, 2 children living in a single family home. Yeah. Mira has a younger brother, right? Do we like our younger brother? She's not going to answer that.
I was going to say jury's out.
I know, exactly. Better to have no answer at all. So I look very closely at the cost of living and what families are going through. I started to look very scientifically at the cost of living that goes into having a 2-adult, 2-child household in Vermont. Yep. In every county in the state, it's somewhere between $130,000 to $160,000 a year you need in that kind of household to pay your bills on time and maybe go on vacation and maybe be able to go out to eat once in a while. Yeah. And that was last year. In the last year, we've seen costs just continue to rise: groceries, gas at the pump, the cost of housing. And so those costs are just hitting people really hard as they try to make that leap from no kids to a couple of kids, paying for childcare.
Act 76, that childcare law that passed that really kind of set the standard for what childcare should be like across the state. We know that got kind of national attention. Talk to me a little bit about how that really changed the game for a lot of people who already had families or were thinking about starting a family.
When we were coming out of the pandemic, first of all, we realized we were going to struggle to create a representative democracy in Montpelier. Who could serve? Who could leave their job or think about their family and serving in Montpelier became even more challenging, just as it was for many people going back to work. And Mira was in my tummy and then just a newborn when we signed Act 76 into law. So what was fun was doing that work with Let's Grow Kids. I was able to say, I grew a kid while we were writing this bill. But you really saw a lot of women in the legislature, particularly, step up and focus on creating a universal program so no one in Vermont would pay more than 18% of their income for childcare, regardless of how many kids they had, and regardless of their income up into the middle class. This kind of universal model is something we should be looking at for all of our policies in the state. Anytime we look at what people can afford, we have these artificial cutoffs and these ways of saying this is affordable housing and this is market rate housing. But a lot of Vermonters are telling us, I still can't afford that. And so sloping things so we have universal affordability is something we are all trying to look at all the time. So one of the last times we did major property tax reform in the legislature was creating what we call the circuit breaker in 1999. And bear with me because this is going to sound nerdy. But the idea behind the circuit breaker is that in 1999, if you made up to $47,000, you would pay no more than a certain percentage of your income, up to 5%, on both your education and municipal property taxes. Now, the $47,000 figure would be about $108,000 with inflation. So that would mean that you have this cap on what you can afford to pay for both of your property tax payments that are due. We look at this $47,000 figure as the very, very poor among us. But what we should be looking at it as is in 1999, this was relief all the way up into the working and middle class. I hope this year, as we look at all of these ways to increase people's quality of life and lower their cost of living, we're looking at doing that on a real income slope. Remembering that, up until $130,000 of income, people are stressed about paying their bills here.
Leave expansion has been a pretty big deal for a lot of families of all kinds. Talk to me a little bit about just how essential that has been for people who are starting up these families, who may not look like the typical American nuclear family that folks kind of picture sometimes, and kind of how the work has developed to really encompass everyone and be inclusive.
That's a great question. Mira, can you eat the goldfish so mommy can talk? Thank you. Hopefully it's evidenced by me having my daughter here today. People need flexible work arrangements. They need all kinds of resources to feel supported. My mother lives in South Burlington, 5 minutes down the road from us, right? Your Nana. My mother was a struggling single mom when she raised me and my two siblings in Los Angeles. And there were a lot of things I think she wishes she was there for that she really didn't get the privilege of enjoying as much of our childhood. When I was thinking about becoming the Senate Majority Leader, I asked my mother, could you cook dinner for us 3 nights a week and really make sure the kids are fed Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and that'll allow me to get through the days in the State House without stress. And she was really happy to be able to do something that meant I could be the Senate Majority Leader and be a good mom. And then I can come home to laughter and a home-cooked meal. Those are the kinds of things we need to make available for every family. Access to their grandparents, access to nutritious food, flexible work arrangements, paid family leave, just anything we can do to keep a family from slipping into poverty or choosing against promotions and more work hours because it will mean that they then lose resources that they rely on. I think healthcare has been a huge part of that. Families are kind of once again beholden to what their employment situation is and what they can afford healthcare wise. And that's hugely unfortunate. We really, really benefited from a lot of the healthcare protections that allowed me to be in the hospital twice with them with some difficult births without breaking the bank entirely. And I think families are back to making some very difficult decisions, unfortunately, about their food access, their healthcare access, and meeting other basic needs.
What do you want folks to know about these next coming years as they maybe are stepping out of their college eras, going through graduation, thinking about what's next, sticking around, and ultimately having a family of their own one day?
Well, I want folks to speak up about their experience. You know, when you're a stressed out young person or stressed out young parent, the last thing you feel like you have the time to do is write to your legislator. But that is the kind of thing that helps me advance these kinds of initiatives and further these causes in the legislature. We got universal childcare done because a lot of parents wrote in and businesses supported their voices. When you become a parent, your almost your entire brain is taken up by worrying, do they have enough to eat?
Yeah.
And as we look at things like SNAP restrictions and changes to, you know, our food assistance programs, I think you'll find that it's the parents in the building who are most passionate about that being our number one investment in our budget. It is hard to imagine not having the resources or the ability to feed your kids. So, you know, I'm often trying to highlight to my colleagues that it's getting very hard to think about kids, to buy a house, to think about a permanent life really anywhere, but especially in Vermont where there are fewer job opportunities and many fewer housing units than we need. So I've really been glad that it has felt like, you know, young people who generally aren't as engaged in politics as our older Vermonters are starting to speak up and say, hey, you know, yes, in our backyard, we need more housing here. We need more opportunity, and we need to be close to childcare and our employment corridors. Mira, if you could help people, what would you do to help people? Would you make sure they have a house?
Yeah.
Would you make sure they can go to school?
Yes.
Would you make sure that people are nice to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you want everyone to have a doggy?
Yes.
That's
That's the big
the
one.
most important one.